Hi, Peter Charles here of Hooked for Life Fly Fishing. And today we're going to look at the 6 essential flies that I would want to use if I was going fishing and I only could bring 6 flies with me. So what would I bring? And what do I think is essential for trout fishing in my area? Now, this is my choice. And somebody else is going to say, well, I choose different flies. Well, that's good. But I think what's important about these kinds of videos, because there's a number of them out there, is that we understand the thinking that goes behind the fly choice rather than just the fly itself. Because I could substitute a variety of flies in this list, and they'd all still be quite valid, and we'll even talk about a few of those choices. But the thinking behind them is what counts. And I'd like to start with probably the one that everybody should have on their list, which is the woolly bugger. It's my streamer choice, and you can use it also as a large nymph as well. And you can do it in a variety of colors. You can add weight. You can have it unweighted. You know, you could use it with a long body, short body. You can mess around with proportions. They all work. So if you had olive, black, white, purple, all those colors are going to work. They work for trout. They work for steelhead. They work for salmon. They work for bass. They work for pike. They work for carp. I mean, they'll catch anything. So, the woolly bugger has to be pretty well either number 1 or close to number 1 on the list. And the one I have here on the vise is a version I use a lot in Lake Erie when I used to fish Lake Erie from a boat. It's got a lead underbody. It's black with a natural grizzly hackle and a black cone head. And I've caught steelhead and smallmouth down as far as 20 feet with this fly. Excellent fly for smallmouth and sheephead. It's been a great fly for me, great producer in this color scheme. And I also use it for river bass as well, and works just as well. But as I say, you don't have to go with this color scheme. You can go olive, you can add flash, you could add rubber legs. Tons of things you can do to a woolly bugger, and they all work. It's just great. So let's get on to the next series and look at a couple of nymphs. And the first one will be the pheasant tail. When Frank Sawyer invented the pheasant tail, he invented a fabulously effective fly. Now, this is an adaptation of the original pheasant tail. It doesn't tie the same way, but I won't go anywhere without pheasant tails in my fly box. And the reason for that is they are probably the most consistent representative of mayfly nymphs. You can mess with proportions to make them look like swimming nymphs or crawler nymphs. This is more of a crawler nymph adaptation, though the body should probably be a little bit thicker. This one can sort of swing both ways as both a swimming nymph and a crawler nymph. I'd want a bit thicker body if I was going after a crawler nymph design, but the reality is it's so flexible in what you can do, and it imitates such a broad range of mayfly nymphs. Just vary the size. At this time of year, the spring, I'm going to be using large pheasant tails. As the season progresses, I go down to smaller ones, but they're all equally effective. If I'm going to pick one nymph and say, okay, you have to live with one nymph for the rest of your life, this is it, the pheasant tail. And I'll do it kind of varieties, some with a pheasant tail thorax, some with a peacock herl thorax, which I have here. That one, it'll work just fine. I've got that, the wing case. I've got legs on this one. Sometimes you put legs, sometimes you don't. It's your choice. It's like the woolly bugger. There's all those little variations you can do with it. But the thing is, it is so effective at imitating so many different mayfly nymphs that it becomes useful. You can use it no matter what's happening on the water, what's coming on. As long as you got the size about right, you're good to go with the pheasant tail. And of course, its stablemate is the ubiquitous hare's ear, gold rib hare's ear. If you're going to fish 2 nymphs in your life, these are the 2, the pheasant tail and the hare's ear. Those 2 nymphs have got to have accounted for a huge amount of trout. I know they've accounted for a lot of trout for me. I would put the pheasant tail first, hare's ear second, but, that's your choice. You might want to do it the other way around. I find this is more of a swimming nymph imitation. Again, you could bulk it up if you want to turn it into a more of a crawler nymph imitation. Adding a bead, leaving the bead off, your choice. You know, I like adding a bead, but I've also done this without adding weight, where I'm relying on the split shot to get the fly down. Also, when you don't have weight, you can fish it high up in the water column like an emerger. Lots of things you can do with a hare's ear that work really, really well. And don't forget, because you're dealing with rabbit fur, when it gets wet, it gets darker. So this gets quite a bit darker when it gets wet. And it looks, you know, again, like the pheasant tail, it can imitate a broad spectrum of mayfly nymphs. You just have to get the size right. So next, on to the wet flies. Okay, you can't do without a partridge orange. Now, I apologize for the appearance of this one. This one's been fished. It's lost a couple of its barbs. It's a little ragged, but you get the idea. The partridge orange is a classic Yorkshire wet fly. It imitates really more the pupal stage of caddis. So it's more like a caddis emerger but you can fish it along the bottom. Depends on the species. You can fish it along the bottom, or you can fish it near the surface. You can swing it, you can dead drift it, lots of different things. So the Yorkshire wet, whether it's a partridge in orange, grouse in green, partridge in yellow, all of these flies are great whenever you see caddis coming off. And as I say, personally, I find that I catch more fish on the partridge in orange, so I tend to use it. It also was the first fly that I tied myself that I caught a fish on, so of course it has a special place for me for that reason. But the Yorkshire wet in general, partridge in orange in particular, very effective trout catchers. So let's move on to the next one, and it's a fly of my own design. My local river has a lot of hydropsyche, and this particular type of caddis fly, the females dive underwater to lay their eggs, and then they swim back up to the surface. Also, it can do a good job of imitating species where they emerge lower down in the water column. They go from pupal to adult down, low down. So anytime you've got caddis actually swimming through the water and popping up through the surface, this is the fly to use. It's called a diving caddis, and I've caught a ton of brown trout on this fly. It's been ridiculous. I do swing it. I swing it on a tight line, but I pulse it. That is the key to making this thing work. Don't just swing it. Swing and pulse at the same time. And it's that extra motion of that back and forth is making the hackle and the wing. And this is one of those flies that fishes better the more it gets beaten up. This one I don't think has been fished yet. But the more ragged it gets, the more that wing gets beaten up, the better it fishes, because everything is just fluffing and moving as you pulse. And so if you see caddis diving towards the surface or seemingly to pop out of the water as an adult, get this thing out. It's called a diving caddis. It's a pattern I put together myself when I wanted to imitate those caddis that are laying eggs or trying to emerge. The closest in a conventional pattern would be an elk hair caddis that you pop under the water. That does the same job. In fact, the very first trout I ever caught on a fly was on an elk hair caddis that had been submerged, and I was pulling it under the water, and the trout hit it. So if you're not into tying this particular pattern and you want a similar pattern that'll do the same job, then go look at the elk hair caddis. Okay, now we're going to look at my choice for a dry fly, and it's the Kings River caddis. And I'm sure you're going to say, like, why that one? Why not an elk hair caddis? Why not an Adams, Catskill dry Adams? Why this one? Well, there's a few reasons. First, it's quite a good imitation of a caddis with its wings, tight to its body. It tends to float right in the surface film, with the wings touching. It's, if you're fishing caddis that are sort of sitting low down in the water, it works wonderfully well. It's an adaptable pattern that we can change body color, hackle color, wing color, and it can be used to imitate quite a broad spectrum using basically the same design. This is the Kings River Caddis as it comes out of the pattern books, but and it has the the caddis green underside. But you can see how the wings are notched to make it look like a real caddis wing. Very easy pattern to tie. Knock them off really quickly. Very effective. You can also skitter this too. If you've got skittering caddis, you can skitter this pattern. It works just fine as a skitter fly. And again, it's one of those flies that tends to work well when it's beaten up because then that quill wing tends to start to split and spread, and that often helps as well. So it's a very, very effective pattern, very quick to tie, and I find it works best in the slower runs where it's not too choppy and the water is a little bit more even, and the fish have longer to look at your fly. Then this one, because it's a closer imitation to a downwing caddis, it does extremely well. And so give it a try. I love the Kings River Caddis because it's so quick to knock off and such a flexible pattern when it comes to what you can do with it, whether it's a tan body, olive body, where you want a darker wing, darker hackle, lighter hackle, all these variations that you can do to this basic pattern. And that's one of the things I like in a pattern is where you can make changes to the basic pattern, still keep true to the pattern, still keep true to the shape, but make these small variations that, you can apply to different species and different times of the year. So that's my 6 essential flies. You might want another selection of 6, and there are other options. I've listed some of them. But, when I go fishing on my local rivers, these are the ones I'm likely to have and pull out of the fly box. The ones I'm most likely. And if you told me, you could only go to the river with 6 flies, that's what I'd be taking with me. So there you go, my 6 essential trout flies. Cheers.